All right, joining us now is the Associate AD at Michigan State, and of course, he is somebody that's been coming up as of recently. Is incredible with numbers, and certainly has a great presentation that has been recently given, and perhaps helping this not just softball but all sports as far as trying to figure out in their selection process. I speak of Kevin Pauga joining us here on In the Circle, a Chicago native. How you doing?
I'm good, Eric. How are you?
Good. Let's talk about it. You've been coming up recently. We had Ronda Revelle on last fall, and you came up when we discussed, the RPI and is there a better formula and a better system. And your name came up, and your name came up recently again as the NCAA met with the softball committee convention there up in Indianapolis. Just tell us a little bit for those who may not be familiar with of your idea of your system with the KPI as they call it.
Yeah, so KPI is something that I initially wrote back when I was doing my undergrad at Michigan State. And to be honest with you, if I ever thought that anybody was going to care about it, I would have named it something way cooler. But in the meantime, what it was intended to do was to dig a little deeper than kind of an on the face metric. Just, hey, you're ranked 27th in this, or you're ranked 117th in this. It was designed to give more of an explanation as to what the value of each game, each performance meant. I kind of equate it to back when you're in fifth, sixth, seventh grade. You have a math test, and you just write the answer to your math test because some people just do the math problem in their head, and then you get marked down for not showing your work on the test. The intent here is to be able to show your work. It's to be able to show that, hey, if you're playing 50 softball games over the course of a season, here's the value relative to performance of every one of those results over the course of the season. And so KPI is a results-based metric. It's intended to measure how good a resume is. There's also some more predictive-based, power-based, efficiency-based metrics that are meant to more quantify how good your team is. But KPI falls more into the how good is your resume bucket.
Now, obviously, currently, most of the sports except basketball uses the RPI, which has been a very controversial. I don't know controversial, but it's certainly gotten a lot of conversation. It really picked up in 2021, in particular with the Big Ten. I know they were upset because really the RPI was kind of put to the test. What is the difference with the KPI that makes it, in your opinion, a better system, or at least something else to look at over, say, an RPI? What are some of the differences for
Yeah,
those who may
so,
not be familiar with?
so I'll tell you this on the RPI. The RPI back in the early 1980s when it was first utilized was fantastic for its time. It was kind of the first sorting mechanism used for postseason play. And for those that don't know, it's essentially 25% your own win percentage, 50% your opponent's win percentage, and then 25% your opponent's win percentage. There's some adjustments in there depending on the sport relative to home and away, and some different things that may get filtered into that formula. But really what it is now is that we've just got so many more data points that are available to us that to simply go by win percentage, that assumes that the teams with the better records are the better teams. And the teams that you beat who have better records are the better teams to beat. And that assumption, while there's obvious truth in some of that, that truth isn't necessarily absolute. So collectively, we're looking to do a deeper dive that hey, this might be a really good team that just played a really strong schedule and thus doesn't have a win-loss record that is reflective of the quality of a given team. If you go to the NFL, you go to Major League Baseball, the NBA, whatever it is, or if you even go within your conference where you're competing against like competition, to be able to use win-loss record there makes a ton of sense because the competition that you're facing is pretty similar. Whereas in Division One, even Division Two, Division Three, the competition level between the top and bottom of Division One has some stark differences. And so to be able to claim that number 250, who is 35 and 15 in softball, is better than the 25th ranked team that might be 500 because they're in the SEC and have a really strong schedule or whatever it may be. Those things are not necessarily apples to apples, and the RPI accounts for that. I'm giving quite an extreme example, But I'd tell you on the RPI that I think that there's simply more modern ways for us to be able to differentiate what is the home away difference in the within a given season. What is the quality of a team as opposed to what is the quality of a team's record?
And for the record, you're not saying, hey, that the RPI should not be used. You're saying we should have more things to use, more, more information,
Yeah.
right? Is that's kind of what you're hoping for? And this is for all sports.
Yeah, it is, and I think that we've got a blueprint that's gone into place now with Division One men's basketball. It's 4 years in, going into a fifth year, where with men's basketball, the net, which is the NCAA evaluation tool, that is the primary sorting tool, and that's meant to try and quantify how good a team is, rather than how good their record is or how good all it's meant to try and do that. So that way you're sorting your opponents based on the net. And then you're building a resume by playing net quality teams. That's the way that it's equated in men's basketball. But beyond the net, you've got two results-based metrics. KPI is one of them. ESPN strength of record is the second. And then you've got three predictive-based metrics that are more efficiency-based. Those are Ken Pomeroy's metric, Jeff Sagarin's metric, as well as ESPN's BPI. And all six of those are on the team sheet. And so what you get there is, if you're across those six metrics, if you're 15, 18, 17, 19, 20, 46, oh, wow, there might be an outlier here. And I promise you that in all six of the metrics, whether it's KPI, whether it's RPI, whether it's net, somewhere along the way, there's an outlier because the data set is too large in terms of number of teams and the number of competitions is too small. If we were actually going to do a mathematical problem to figure out how good teams were, we would play way more than 30 basketball games or 50 softball or baseball games. Like from a sample size standpoint, that doesn't qualify as a sample size. We would play hundreds of thousands of computer simulations in order to try and do that. So I'm a big advocate to get multiple data points on those team sheets and equip these committees with the tools in their toolbox that will help them to be able to, one, identify and minimize the impact of potential outliers, as well as create a narrative around teams based on where they may fall in the different types of metrics.
And I followed you for men's basketball. Your formula had Kansas #1 going into the tournament, which turned out to be, dead on. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's formula. You've done presentations for this. What's the most common question you get about it?
Yeah, there's a couple things. First off, folks are afraid of change, but yet people don't necessarily like what they have either. So as much as the RPI has been through the ringer over the past few years, if you were to introduce a new metric, then there'd be some frustration there. So everybody kind of wants the perfect system that doesn't necessarily exist. But the questions come up relative to anything that involves efficiency. That starts getting into scores and I've got some data points in different sports that show that hey, a 4-run seventh inning or an 8-0 run at the end of a basketball game or an extra goal at the end of a soccer match is not having enough impact where it's really moving you from an efficiency standpoint, and that the overall accuracy of the metrics increases pretty substantially when you start to include scores. Because what starts to come into play is that you can start to identify that, hey, this team may not have played a great schedule, but they are consistently dominant, and it is hard to be dominant regardless of the sport that you're talking about. So there does have to be some level of reward for dominance, but not so much where folks are running up the score. So that's certainly a concern. Coaches are always looking to figure out how they need to schedule, what they need to do in terms of qualifying for postseason. The easiest answer to that is win games, and do so against quality competition and challenge yourself. And so that's typically the most common question that comes up. There's also just an overall ask as to how it works and wanting to ensure that some of the finer details are understood as well.
what was it that motivated you to come up with this? Was there a particular sport or a particular moment you're like, we need to do something better? How did you come up with this?
Yeah, so my passion is in scheduling. So I'm working with a number of conferences and professional sports leagues on the scheduling front to creating schedule optimizations, conference schedules, league schedules, incorporating television facilities, all of that into weather in the case of softball, incorporating those parameters into conference schedules. So that's kind of where my foundation lies here. But as that relates to non-conference schedule and wanting to get behind the curtain a little bit to help understand what's going on, that's the whole concept behind going on a game by game basis and trying to get those finer details so that I can tell a coach, hey, if you go 30-20 against this schedule, it's better or worse than 40-10 against that schedule, and kind of gives them an idea of perspective. Because now that we've got those metrics that help answer those questions, let's dig deeper. Let's dive in and get into it, because we're never going to have equal schedules. There's all sorts of reasons for that. Some of it is some folks gaming the system. Some of it is weather. Some of it is travel. Some of it is financial decisions, conference affiliation. We're just not realistically going to get there. So it's more important for us to be able to understand what it is that we need to do given our situation, whether you're in the North, whether you're in the South, whether you have the budget to be able to travel multiple times in the non-conference, whether your spring break falls in the non-conference as opposed to a final exam period because you're on the quarter system. Everybody's kind of in a unique position, and this helps peel back that curtain.
You've helped out with the NFL schedule too, right? If I'm not mistaken, as well. So I
Yeah.
mean, that's pretty good. One of the people asked me the question about neutral field games versus being on the road versus home. How is that? Is that equated in your formula? How do you address that?
Yeah, it is. And the good part here is that I don't have any preconceived notions as to what it is to win at home or on the road in a given season. The data from that particular year is what drives those adjustments. So with every data point, it's easier to win on the road. It's easier to win at home. Even at a neutral site, it's easier to win as the team batting last as opposed to the team batting first. That, like, in baseball, softball, neutral sites aren't created equal because of last bats. So there's ways to be able to incorporate that into the formula, where essentially what we're doing is we're offsetting the advantage in a given season against a given opponent for anything that makes a game that I may play against a given team different from a game you may play against a different team. So if I'm playing a team on the road and you're playing them at home, we're essentially quantifying, hey, what is the increased or decreased value to offset that advantage. So we're doing that with team quality. We're doing that with home away. What we saw during COVID was that those numbers fluctuated a little bit. Obviously, year over year, most years, those adjustments are really similar, not exact, but really similar in terms of a national perspective of game location. But why should you get an advantage of, let's say, 0.1 RPI wins or whatever it may be for a road win, regardless of who it's against? Let's instead dive into adjusting for that opponent and the location and everything that goes into that game, so that we're getting down to one value to be able to explain it to somebody.
What's the feedback you've gotten from when you've done presentations from coaches, the NCAA? Do you sense movement here? Because you came up, I mentioned earlier, Ronna Ravel brought you up on this show last fall. She wasn't the only one. There were other people off the air that brought your name up, especially after the 2021 season. What feedback have you gotten from that perspective, as far as, do you sense some movement there? Are we still early in the process? Where do you feel about the feedback?
Yeah, I usually wait until I get off the Zoom and then let them talk behind my back how crazy I am. But no, seriously, in general, I would term the feedback as having an open mind. I don't think that everybody's ready to go all in, and I'm not suggesting that they do. Like I told you at the top, I'm suggesting that you bring multiple tools into the fold here, to be able to check boxes in different buckets and to be able to explain things. Because as a coach, the most frustrating thing to me would be even the perception, because I'm not sure that it's a reality, but the perception of a moving target of what I have to do year over year. And again, I think that that's more perception than reality. I think that it's actually pretty consistent year over year. But what we've seen in men's basketball with the 6 metrics is it's actually increased the consistency of that committee pretty remarkably year over year. And so and I'm not sure that there's been nearly as much controversy about this team in, this team out, or major surprises. These selection shows shouldn't be surprise parties. And I say that in the sense that a team that's not having a watch party because they don't think that they're close shouldn't be getting in, and a team that's already booked their flight to wherever shouldn't be left out. Like if we want to debate the last two or three teams, or those last couple right on the edge, you've been around this enough that those resumes start to get really similar, and in that room it's a split vote, and you're really splitting hairs at the end. But we shouldn't have surprises. People that know and understand this, they should be pretty darn good at projecting what the brackets should look like, because that means that the coaches are gaining an understanding of what they need to do in order to qualify for postseason, as well as increase their standing once they're across that line.
Yeah, and I'm for more data, more data points. One of the things that kind of I think frustrates some of the fans is, for example, this past year, UCLA was a higher seed than Arizona State. That was a lot of controversy there because Arizona State had won the Pac-12, beat them head to head.
Yep.
UCLA played a better schedule, so that's why they probably got the nod there as far as their schedule overall strength there. So I agree with you. I think the more data that we have, I don't know why having more data is a bad thing, and I've never understood that.
Yeah, I think it's just been a slow moving process. Would maybe be the thing there. You brought up head to head. Let me give you this anecdote from a head to head standpoint. Let's say that the Dallas Cowboys are 11-6, and let's say that the Philadelphia Eagles are 10-7. But the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Cowboys twice during the season. The Cowboys still win the NFC East, and the same thing works within your conference play. There is a point relative to head to head where you do enough outside of the head to head to be able to pass a team despite the head to head. So think of it that much like we do in conference standings, that head to head really only comes into play when you're starting to talk about a tie. UCLA and Arizona State, at least on my KPI world, they were 6th and 7th. Arizona State falling 6, UCLA falling 7. And they were within 0.001 KPI of each other, which I'll just tell you that's relatively small. And I'd call that just about a virtual tie. And in the room, that's plenty close enough where I'm going to speculate that there was a lot of discussion and debate around those two in particular, because they were so close. So the head to head is oftentimes an easy crutch that sometimes the committee may use. But all in all, that crutch should probably only be used when you're really that close.
You mentioned right there, that's a good one. I didn't realize that's pretty good. Arizona, that's kind of what I thought in my head going in about Arizona State UCLA. That was pretty close. Was there any other, I don't know if the word is discrepancy is a good word, but any other comparisons you had in your system that you saw kind of play out this past season in softball that stood out to you? That you're either like, ooh, I don't know about that one, or you're like, I got to look into that.
I'll tell you that Oklahoma's pretty good.
That
I
was a
caught
hard
on.
one.
Yeah, caught onto that. You know what? I'll maybe take it a different direction and talk specifically about during the COVID season, because I think that's where
Yeah.
there became increased frustration around the metrics altogether.
Yes.
And here's the reality: is that regardless of sport, for those conferences that did not play non-conference competition, so they really just had games within their own pocket.
Right.
Those conferences, if there was parity in those conferences, they were all going to push toward the middle. If there were teams that separated themselves in those conferences, good or bad, that's where you were going to have extreme outliers. So you bring up some on the softball side, but I'll give you Patriot League men's basketball. This is going way into the weeds. You didn't think that we were going to go there
Love
here.
it.
But in Patriot League men's basketball during the COVID year, they not only played league-only games, but they split their league to where they were playing the same team 6 times and weren't seeing other teams in their league. So it created kind of hyper pockets, if you will. And Colgate, and mind you, Colgate's been really good in men's basketball for a few years. They were top 10 in the net that year. And due respect to Colgate, you know what? I'll answer this differently. We have no idea whether they were a top 10 or not. We don't know if they were 10 or 150 because we talked about sample size. There wasn't enough of a sample size to be able to discern anything from that. And so same thing applies to those leagues during COVID that didn't go outside of conference. Or now that we're out of COVID or in a non-COVID year, those leagues that don't play enough non-conference to be able to garner some cross-pollination run into the same issues. So that's where it's a real critical component to be able to determine, hey, how many conference games should we be playing? How many non-conference games should we be playing? How many times are we sending the same teams to the same tournaments and playing the same opponents, even if we may not be playing one another? You want to avoid those pockets if you want to try and get a true sample size in this limited scope of 50 data points. I mean, think about this, that then in softball, you're playing, I mean, because you're doing series and conference play, you're playing, what is it? It's like less than 10% of Division One. Like more than 90% of Division One, you're never going to see them. And you're probably not going to have an opponent that matches that as well. So I might be compared to you, where not only did we not play each other, but we have no common opponents. So we're already 2 degrees removed from Kevin Bacon here, that to be able to compare back. So that just again kind of emphasizes what that sample size really means.
Well, and I know schools have complained, like they feel like they feel like the RPI, and again, everybody always has their conspiracy theories, but they feel like the bigger conferences have a bigger advantage, for example, because in conference you can't control how your teams are doing at the bottom, right? And so they don't get, all of a sudden they're perceived as not playing, from a stronger schedule. When in reality, it's the conference that kind of drags you down when they have no control over that.
It can work both ways.
Yeah.
Coaches also get frustrated based on the sequencing of how the RPI evolves over the course of a season. Like, hey, I won a game and I moved down. Well, you didn't move down just because you won that game. You, like, every one of your opponents also played, and the 10 teams above you and the 10 teams below you also played, and the team right behind you may have beaten a really good team. While you, like, there's so much going on that what we're essentially experiencing is the data points recalibrating in real time, and regenerating in real time, and wins and losses don't always influence going up or down. So I'd preach patience in terms of let it evolve. Don't worry about where you are in February and March. Like, start paying attention to it toward the end. But that data is still recalibrating. The other thing is that there's no conspiracy theories. I promise you that there's nobody in Google Cloud or the Amazon Cloud or whatever your favorite cloud is, or Excel or whatever it is. There's not a bonus point for being in a certain conference. It's intended to be a measurement, and those advantages, disadvantages usually come down to winning and losing at the end of the day.
Couple last things before we let you go, right? Because I know you're taking a busy schedule, because you do this for all the sports. So I'm curious, is there one sport that's more challenging to your system or more favorable? Because obviously, for example, every sport's different. Soccer, for example, has ties. Volleyball goes by sets. Kind of give me a comparison of all the sports there, and are you satisfied with the results it's kind of spitting out, or is there some challenges that come with the various sports?
You're right. The ties are tricky. Ties are really tricky. What is, like, if you could ask a panel of 10 coaches, hey, is a tie the midpoint between a win and a loss, or is it closer to a loss or closer to a win? And I bet you get 10 different answers. And so until we get agreement as to what a tie is on the spectrum of a win versus a loss, I'm not sure that we can properly quantify that. We need to get some agreement to there. What we're quantifying in KPI is right now any team sport where two teams are competing head to head. So we're working on some things relative to golf and gymnastics and wrestling, where you start getting into individual competitions, or in golf's case, you get into multiple competitors competing for place in a given tournament. So that's down the road still. But I'm always looking to kind of refine and kind of nitpick some of the finer details in terms of what goes into KPI. I'd tell you that I think that it's some details around the margins now. I think that the foundation is there. But I've got some opinions and some adjustments that I think still need to come to KPI to maybe get it to a little bit closer to what is represented in those game values. So it's something where I'm consistently running data. I've ignored the COVID year across sports altogether in terms of trying to balance that out. But the other complicating factor is results that are really low scoring, or a 1-0 soccer game versus a 72-65 basketball game. Like, you have more possessions with values to them within basketball. Volleyball, you're dealing with sets, and you're dealing with points within the set. So each sport has a few unique elements that maybe make the volleyball KPI just a little bit different than a basketball KPI or a soccer KPI.
Plus, like, a soccer has smaller sample size than, say, obviously softball or baseball,
Totally.
which also makes it challenging. Of the other sports, because I know a lot of people in softball have embraced your formula. How have the other sports kind of reacted to it? Have they have embraced it too? Do you sense some kind of like, okay, yeah, we want to push for this because I want something other than the RPI?
Yeah, I think that there's some momentum in a few sports. I think that it's important for people to collectively get on board rather than to push something through and get some consensus and some agreement and do it the proper way. And hey, this is how that's, well, maybe we need to adjust this, or maybe we need to discuss this a little bit further. So I think it's more about improving the process, improving the transparency of the process, the predictability of the process. And at the end of the day, there does need to be some level of benefit for challenging yourself. It is better for the sport if like versus like competition plays more often. You want top level matchups for attendance, for early season interest, for television. Like there's a reason why in the NFL, so they get their 6 divisional opponents. They've got some rotational elements in terms of who plays who, but some of those extra games, the first place, if the NFC North and the NFC East are matched up in a year, the NFC North champions get in the NFC West and the NFC South champion in those extra games. And so there's a compelling element to this. Like, we're trying to drive fan interest. So if the best team in the country is playing a non-conference schedule that doesn't have any top level teams, then nobody's really going to want to watch them beat everybody 10-0 and consistently in the non-conference. That's not compelling. So how do we create something that is fair but also compelling along the way?
Where can people find more information and about the KPI and follow it?
Yeah, so we're at factorsports.com. That's factor spelled FAKTOR sports.com. So we're there. We're on Twitter at factor FAKTOR, as well as at KPI Sports on Twitter as well. So getting some information out there. We've got a lot of work to do and a lot of growth hopefully to come. But at the end of the day, we're just sitting here building schedules and some tools and trying to help improve the underlying sport.
Well, I'm a fan of it. I'm a fan of your process. Like I said, I've spoken to Sandy Atkins, who was the committee chairperson this year at softball, and Matt Larson the year before. And one of the common questions I keep asking committee chair people is, do we have other formulas or others that we're thinking about? And I was happy to hear your name and your formula come up here over the last year, since especially since the COVID year. So appreciate you, the hard work you're doing, and thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule. We definitely want to have you back on the show, maybe even have you on during the season just to see how the season's going and things like that, and certainly kind of even get into more of the weeds, if you will, of this process. But in the meantime, thank you for coming on the show.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.